How does it feel when the person you called your biggest mistake serves you divorce papers in front of your friends? I thought humiliating my husband at our dinner party would make me feel powerful. Instead, the next day, I watched my entire life unravel when he calmly delivered his revenge, all within the law. The wine had loosened my tongue more than usual that Friday evening. Our suburban three-bedroom house buzzed with laughter as my sister Jess, her husband Simon, and a few other friends gathered around our mahogany dining table. The chandelier cast a warm glow over the remnants of dinner, but the atmosphere was anything but cozy for my husband Henry. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking when I married him, I said, gesturing dismissively toward Henry as he quietly cleared plates. The words tumbled out with practiced ease, each one designed to cut a little deeper. Biggest mistake of my life, really. Jess nearly choked on her wine, laughing. Orinthia, you're terrible. But seriously, what did you see in him back then? Henry paused at the kitchen doorway, his shoulders tensing. At 35, he still had the same lean frame and gentle brown eyes that had attracted me years ago, but now they just looked tired. Always tired. I guess I thought stability was sexy, I continued, emboldened by the laughter around the table. You know, the whole responsible software engineer thing. But God, is it boring. He comes home, eats dinner in silence, and falls asleep watching documentaries about coding. Riveting stuff. Our 8-year-old daughter Ava looked up from her barely touched dessert, her dark eyes darting between Henry and me. The child had inherited her father's sensitivity along with his eyes, and I could see the confusion written across her small face. "Mom, why are you saying mean things about Dad?" she whispered. "Oh, honey, grown-ups are just talking," I said, waving her off. "Why don't you go play in your room?" But Ava didn't move. Instead, tears began forming in her eyes as she watched her father stand frozen in the doorway, a stack of dirty plates in his hands. "Come on, Orinthia," Simon said uncomfortably, shifting in his seat. "Maybe we should talk about something else." Jess shot her husband a sharp look. "Oh, please, Simon. Orinthia's just being honest about her feelings. There's nothing wrong with that." "Exactly," I said, refilling my wine glass. "I mean, look at him. When's the last time Henry did anything spontaneous? When's the last time he surprised me or made me feel alive? He's like living with a piece of furniture that occasionally mumbles about server configurations." Henry finally moved, setting the plates down on the kitchen counter with deliberate care. When he turned back to face us, his expression was unreadable. "Orinthia," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the obvious hurt in his eyes. "Can I speak with you privately?" "See what I mean?" I laughed, looking around the table for validation. "Everything has to be private and proper with Henry. God forbid we have an actual conversation in front of other people." "That's not what this is about, and you know it," Henry replied, his composure beginning to crack. "Oh, what's it about then? Are you going to lecture me about being dramatic again? Tell me I'm embarrassing myself?" I stood up, wine glass in hand, feeling powerful and vindicated. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, everyone. He can't handle any criticism, can't handle the truth about what our marriage really is." Ava's tears were flowing freely now, and she slipped away from the table without anyone except Henry noticing. He watched her go, his jaw tightening. "You're right," Henry said finally, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "This conversation is exactly what our marriage has become." He turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than his presence had. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the soft click of our bedroom door closing. "Wow," Jess said, breaking the tension with another laugh. "He's really dramatic, isn't he?" "Always," I replied, settling back into my chair with a satisfied smirk. "But at least now you all understand what I'm dealing with." The evening continued with more wine and gossip, but I couldn't shake the image of Ava's tear-stained face or the way Henry's shoulders had sagged as he walked away. Still, I pushed those thoughts aside. I had finally said what I'd been thinking for months, and it felt liberating. It wasn't until later, after everyone had gone home and the house had fallen quiet, that I realized I hadn't seen either Henry or Ava since dinner. The silence felt different somehow, not peaceful, but empty. I climbed the stairs to check on Ava, but her room was dark and she was already asleep, or pretending to be. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see her small form curled tightly under her covers, facing away from the door. When I reached our bedroom, I found Henry's side of the bed empty and undisturbed. His laptop was gone from the nightstand, and his work clothes weren't in their usual spot on the chair. For the first time that evening, a small knot of unease formed in my stomach, but I was too tired and too wine-drunk to pursue it. Tomorrow, I told myself, Henry would be back to his usual routine, and this would all blow over like it always did. I was wrong. Monday morning arrived with the harsh reality of a hangover and the memory of Friday's dinner party. I sat at my desk at Morrison & Associates, where I worked as an office manager, trying to focus on scheduling appointments and processing paperwork. But my mind kept drifting to the weekend's strange silence. Henry had been cordial but distant, speaking only when necessary about practical matters. Ava's soccer practice, grocery lists, household repairs. He'd slept in the guest room both nights, claiming he had work to catch up on, but I'd heard him moving around the house at odd hours. My phone buzzed with a text message, pulling me from my thoughts. The name on the screen made me smile. Milo Hart. "How was your weekend, beautiful? Still thinking about our conversation Friday night?" I glanced around the office to make sure no one was watching, then typed back quickly. Milo was the bartender at the Lantern, a trendy spot downtown where I'd started going after work. He was everything Henry wasn't: spontaneous, charming, and most importantly, he made me feel desired again. Boring as usual, my husband spent the whole weekend sulking because I was honest about our marriage in front of friends. "Poor baby, you deserve so much better than that. Want to grab lunch today? I'm free until my shift starts." The familiar thrill ran through me as I read his message. This was what I'd been missing: excitement, passion, someone who actually wanted to spend time with me. "I'd love to. Meet me at Cafe Luna at noon." "Can't wait to see you." I spent the rest of the morning in a much better mood, actually humming, as I filed documents and returned phone calls. This was what life should feel like: anticipation, butterflies, the promise of something more than the mundane routine I'd fallen into with Henry. At 11:45, I was touching up my lipstick in the bathroom when my coworker Janet knocked on the door. "Orinthia, you have a call on line 2. Says it's about your daughter's school?" My heart skipped, but when I picked up the phone, it was just a reminder about Ava's parent-teacher conference next week. Still, the interruption reminded me that I was living a double life, and the weight of that realization sat heavier than I expected. I pushed the feeling aside and headed to Cafe Luna, where Milo was already waiting at a corner table. At 31, he had the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing he was attractive. Dark hair, bright smile, and the ability to make every conversation feel like flirting. "There's my favorite escape artist," he said, standing to kiss my cheek. "You look amazing." "Thank you," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "I needed this today." "Rough morning with the husband?" "More like a rough few days. He's been giving me the silent treatment since I told my friends what I really think about our marriage." I found myself downplaying the hurt I'd seen in Henry's eyes, focusing instead on my own frustration. It's so typical of him to shut down instead of actually talking about our problems. Milo reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "You know what I think? I think you're too good for him. You're vibrant and alive, and he's holding you back." The words were exactly what I wanted to hear, validation for feelings I'd been harboring for months. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never gotten married so young, if I'd waited and met someone like you instead. "It's not too late," Milo said, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. "You're only 33. You have your whole life ahead of you. We talked for over an hour, and I found myself sharing details about my marriage that I'd never voiced before. How Henry and I had grown apart after Ava was born. How he'd become more focused on work and less attentive to me. How I felt invisible in my own home. Milo listened with the kind of attention Henry hadn't given me in years, asking questions and offering sympathy. When he suggested we meet again later in the week, I agreed without hesitation. Walking back to the office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe Jess was right when she kept telling me to live my truth. Maybe I did deserve better than what I had with Henry. My phone buzzed again as I reached my desk. This time it was Jess. Called Henry's mom yesterday to check on Ava. Marjorie seemed really cold to me. Did you tell her about Friday night? I frowned, typing back quickly. No, why would I? What did she say? Just seemed like she was taking Henry's side about something. You know how she's always been jealous of you. The unease from Friday night crept back in. Marjorie had never been my biggest fan, but she'd always been civil for Henry and Ava's sake. If she was being cold to Jess, it meant Henry had told her something. But what, exactly? I tried calling Henry, but it went straight to voicemail. When I called the house, Ava answered, Hi, Mom. Are you coming home for dinner? Of course, sweetheart. Is Dad there? He's in his office. He said not to bother him unless it's an emergency. Okay, well, I'll be home around 6. Can you tell him I called? Sure, Mum. Are you and Dad fighting? The question hit me harder than it should have. Why would you ask that, honey? You've been sleeping in different rooms, and Dad seems sad. I closed my eyes, feeling a stab of guilt. Everything's fine, Ava. Sometimes grown-ups just need space to work things out. Okay, I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. After I hung up, I sat staring at my computer screen, unable to focus on work. The afternoon dragged by slowly, and I found myself checking my phone obsessively for messages from Milo, anything to distract me from the growing certainty that something had shifted in my marriage. At 5:30, as I was packing up to leave, my email chimed with a new message. The sender was listed as a friend, and there was no subject line. I opened it and felt my blood turn cold. There were screenshots of my text conversation with Milo from that morning, along with several others from the past few weeks. Messages where I'd complained about Henry, flirted shamelessly, and made plans to meet up. At the bottom of the email was a single line. Your husband deserves better. My hands were shaking as I deleted the email and looked around the office wildly. Who had access to my messages? How had someone gotten these screenshots? I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a bluff, someone fishing for information. But the screenshots were real, down to the timestamps and profile pictures. I grabbed my purse and rushed out of the office, my mind racing. I needed to get home and figure out how to handle this before Henry found out. If he found out. But as I drove through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if he already knew? By Wednesday evening, I was a bundle of nerves. The anonymous email had been followed by 2 more, each containing additional screenshots of my conversations with Milo. Whoever was sending them seemed to have access to weeks' worth of messages, and they were clearly building up to something. I'd been careful around Henry, watching for any sign that he knew about Milo, but he remained distant and polite. If anything, his calmness was more unnerving than anger would have been. Jess had convinced me to meet her for drinks at the Lantern, arguing that I needed to stop hiding and live my life. You're acting like a criminal, she'd said over the phone. You haven't done anything wrong except be honest about your feelings. So there I was at 7 p.m., sitting at the bar where Milo worked, trying to pretend everything was normal. The Lantern was busy for a Wednesday, filled with after-work crowds and the usual mix of young professionals and college students. Milo slid a cosmopolitan across the bar to me with a wink. You look tense, beautiful. Rough week? You could say that, I replied, taking a large sip of the drink. Just some drama at home, nothing I can't handle. Your husband's still giving you the silent treatment, among other things. I didn't want to tell him about the emails. It would make everything seem too real, too dangerous. Milo leaned closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. You know what I think? I think you need to stop worrying about what other people want and start focusing on what makes you happy. His hand covered mine on the bar, and I felt that familiar rush of excitement. This was what I'd been missing. Someone who saw me as desirable, who made me feel alive. Maybe you're right, I said, leaning into his touch. Maybe I've been putting everyone else first for too long. Definitely too long, he agreed, his thumb stroking my knuckles. A woman like you should be worshipped, not ignored. I was about to respond when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Orinthia. I spun around on my bar stool to find Henry standing 3 feet away, his expression unreadable. He was still in his work clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt, but there was something different about his posture. More rigid, more controlled. Henry, I said, my voice coming out higher than intended. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, he replied calmly, especially since you told Ava you were working late tonight. My cheeks flushed hot. I had told Ava that, and I'd told Henry I was having dinner with Jess. I am having dinner with Jess. She's just running late. Henry's eyes moved to Milo, who was still standing close to me, his hand now resting possessively on my shoulder. And this is? Milo Hart, Milo said, extending his hand with a cocky smile. I'm a friend of your wife's. Henry didn't take the offered handshake. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened an app. That's interesting, because according to our shared location app, you've been here for over an hour. And according to your calendar, which we share for family planning, you don't have any dinner plans with Jess tonight. My mouth went dry. I'd forgotten about the location sharing we'd set up years ago for safety and convenience. And the shared calendar had been my idea, to help coordinate Ava's activities. Henry, you're being paranoid, I said, trying to regain control of the situation. I stopped by for one drink while waiting for Jess. There's nothing wrong with that. One drink, Henry repeated, his voice still eerily calm. With your hand in his. Several people at nearby tables were starting to notice our conversation, and I felt a surge of anger at Henry for embarrassing me in public. You know what, Henry? Yes, I'm having a drink with Milo. He's good company, which is more than I can say for my husband lately. The words came out louder than I'd intended, fueled by wine and adrenaline. Milo squeezed my shoulder supportively. Hey man, we're just talking. No need to get upset. Upset? Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm not upset. I'm actually quite clear-headed for the first time in months. What's that supposed to mean? I demanded. It means I know exactly what's been going on, Orinthia. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the sudden interest in going out with friends. The way you've been treating me like I'm some kind of burden you can't wait to get rid of. You're being dramatic, I said, but my voice was shaking now. This is exactly why I need space from you. You turn everything into some kind of conspiracy. A conspiracy, Henry repeated. Is that what you call it when your wife has been having an emotional affair for weeks? The words hit me like a slap. Several people at the bar were openly staring now, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. That's ridiculous, I said, standing up from my bar stool. Milo and I are friends. I'm sorry if you're too insecure to handle me having male friends. Friends, Henry said, pulling out his phone again. Friends who text each other things like, I can't stop thinking about you, and my husband doesn't understand me like you do. My blood turned to ice. He had my messages. Somehow, Henry had my messages with Milo. I don't know what you think you saw. I started, but Henry held up his hand. I don't think anything, Orinthia. I know. I have screenshots of every conversation you've had with Mr. Hart here for the past 3 weeks. Every complaint about our marriage, every plan to meet up, every lie you've told me and Ava about where you were going. Milo shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly realizing this was more serious than he'd bargained for. Look, maybe I should go. No, I said quickly, grabbing his arm. Don't let him intimidate you. Henry's always been controlling and paranoid. He probably hacked my phone or something equally crazy. Henry laughed again, that same cold sound. I didn't have to hack anything, Orinthia. Someone's been sending me your messages. Someone who thinks I deserve to know what my wife really thinks of me. That's impossible, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I remembered the anonymous emails. Someone had been watching, collecting evidence, and sending it to Henry. Is it impossible that you called our marriage the biggest mistake of your life in front of our friends? Henry asked. Is it impossible that you've been meeting another man for lunch and drinks while telling our daughter you're working late? Is it impossible that you've been lying to my face for weeks while planning your exit strategy? I felt trapped, cornered by the truth of his words and the stares of everyone around us. My only defense was to attack. Fine, I shouted, my voice carrying across the bar. Yes, I've been talking to Milo. Yes, I told my friends what I really think about our marriage. And you know what, Henry? Everything I said was true. You are boring. You are controlling. And being married to you has been suffocating me for years. The bar had gone almost completely quiet now, with everyone watching our very public meltdown. Milo took a step back, clearly wanting to distance himself from the drama. You want to know why I talk to other men? I continued, my voice getting louder and more desperate. Because they listen to me. They make me feel like I'm worth something. They don't treat me like a roommate who occasionally shares their bed. Henry stood there, taking my verbal assault, his face expressionless. When I finally ran out of steam, he nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest, he said quietly. Finally. He pulled out his phone one more time and took several photos, of me, of Milo, of the drinks on the bar, of the intimate way we'd been sitting together. What are you doing? I demanded. Documenting, Henry said simply. For the lawyers. Lawyers? The word came out as a whisper. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences, Orinthia? Did you think you could humiliate me in front of our friends, lie to our daughter, and carry on an affair without any repercussions? It's not an affair, I protested weakly. We're just friends. Friends don't send each other photos of what they're wearing to bed, Henry said. Friends don't make plans to meet at hotels. Friends don't tell each other they're falling in love. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had sent Milo a photo last week, just a silly selfie in my pajamas. And we had talked about maybe taking things to the next level. But love, had I really used that word? Looking at Henry's calm, controlled expression, I realized he had everything. Every message, every photo, every stupid, impulsive thing I'd said or done. Henry, please, I said, my anger deflating into panic. Can we just go home and talk about this privately? No, he said, pocketing his phone. I think you've made your feelings clear enough for one evening, and in such a public way too. I thought you'd appreciate the same courtesy. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. Oh, and Orinthia, you might want to find somewhere else to stay tonight. I think we both need some space to think about what comes next. With that, he walked out of the lantern, leaving me standing at the bar with Milo and a room full of strangers who had just witnessed the destruction of my marriage. Milo cleared his throat awkwardly. So, that was intense. Maybe we should call it tonight. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw what Henry must have seen. A handsome bartender who enjoyed the attention of married women, but had no interest in dealing with the messy consequences. Yeah, I said quietly. Maybe we should. As I gathered my purse and coat, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had just destroyed her family for a fantasy. I spent Thursday night at Jess's house, lying awake on her couch and replaying the scene at the lantern over and over in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Henry's face, not angry, not hurt, but resolved. That was somehow worse than any screaming match would have been. Friday morning, I drove home early, hoping to catch Ava before school, and maybe talk to Henry before he left for work. I needed to do damage control, to explain my side of things before his version of events became the only truth. But when I pulled into our driveway, I saw Marjorie's silver Honda parked behind Henry's car. My mother-in-law's presence was never a good sign, and given the circumstances, it felt like a declaration of war. I let myself in through the front door and heard voices in the kitchen. Ava's higher pitch mixed with the lower tones of Henry and Marjorie. They were having breakfast together, looking like a complete family unit that somehow didn't include me. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound casual as I entered the kitchen. Ava looked up from her cereal bowl, her expression guarded. "Hi, Mom. Dad said you had to work really late last night." I glanced at Henry, who was calmly buttering toast at the counter. He'd covered for me with Ava, which was more than I deserved after Wednesday night. "That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes work keeps me out later than expected." Marjorie set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. At 61, Henry's mother was still an imposing woman, with steel grey hair and the kind of direct gaze that had always made me uncomfortable. "How convenient," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I suppose work has been keeping you quite busy lately." "Marjorie," I said carefully, "I'm not sure what Henry has told you, but—" "He's told me enough," she cut me off. "More than enough, actually." Ava's eyes darted between us, confusion and worry written across her young face. I realized I needed to get her out of the room before this conversation went any further. "Ava, honey, why don't you go get your backpack ready for school?" "I already did," she said quietly. "Grandma Marjorie helped me." Of course she had. Marjorie had probably been here since dawn, playing the perfect grandmother while I was passed out on my sister's couch. "Well, maybe you should double-check," I said, forcing a smile. "Make sure you have your math homework." Ava looked to Henry for confirmation, and he nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart. We'll be up to say goodbye in a few minutes." After Ava left the kitchen, Marjorie turned to face me fully, her expression cold and judgmental. "I have to say, Orinthia, I'm disappointed, but I can't say I'm surprised." "Excuse me? I've watched you for 8 years, and I've seen how you treat my son, the constant criticism, the way you dismiss his accomplishments, the complete lack of respect for everything he does for this family." "You don't know anything about our marriage," I said, my defenses rising. "You see what you want to see. I see a man who works 60 hours a week to provide for his family, who comes home to a wife who treats him like an inconvenience. I see a father who adores his daughter but gets criticized for every parenting decision he makes." Henry remained silent, methodically cleaning up the breakfast dishes. His calm was infuriating. I wanted him to defend me, to tell his mother she was out of line. "Henry," I said, "are you going to let her talk to me like this in my own home?" He looked up from the sink, his expression neutral. "Is anything she said untrue?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "I can't believe you're taking her side." "I'm not taking anyone's side, Orinthia. I'm just asking if what my mother observed about our marriage is inaccurate." "She's never liked me," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "She's been waiting for something like this to happen so she could turn you against me." "Turn him against you?" Marjorie laughed bitterly. "My dear, you've done that all by yourself. I didn't make you humiliate him in front of your friends. I didn't make you sneak around with other men. I didn't make you lie to that precious little girl upstairs about where you were spending your evenings." "It wasn't an affair," I protested. "Milo and I are just friends." "Friends," Marjorie repeated. "Is that what you call men who send you messages about how beautiful you are? Men you meet for secret lunches and evening drinks? Men you complain to about your husband?" My stomach dropped. Henry had shown her the messages. Everything I'd said to Milo, every complaint and flirtation, had been laid bare for his mother to judge. "You had no right to show her those," I said to Henry. "I had every right," he replied calmly. "Marjorie is going to be helping with Ava for the next few weeks while we figure out our living arrangements. She needed to understand the situation." "Living arrangements?" The words came out as a whisper. "I think it's best if we separate for a while." Henry said. Give us both some space to think about what we want. What you want, you mean? I don't get a say in this. You made your choice when you decided to pursue another man, Marjorie interjected. You made your choice when you called your marriage a mistake in front of your friends. You made your choice when you lied to your daughter about working late so you could meet your boyfriend. He's not my boyfriend, I said weakly. Then what is he? Henry asked. Because based on your messages, you were certainly heading in that direction. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say? That I'd been planning to leave Henry for Milo. That I'd been using Milo to feel better about myself. That I'd been too cowardly to end my marriage honestly, so I'd been sabotaging it instead. I need to talk to Ava, I said finally. Actually, Marjorie said, standing up, I think Ava needs some stability right now. She's been asking a lot of questions about why Mommy and Daddy are sleeping in different rooms, why there's so much tension in the house. She's my daughter, I said fiercely. You can't keep her from me. No one's keeping her from you, Henry said, but she's going to stay here, in her own home, with her regular routine. If you want to see her, you're welcome to visit, but I think it's best if you find somewhere else to live for now. This is my house too, I protested. Actually, Henry said, reaching into his briefcase and pulling out a manila folder, it's not. The house is in my name only. We bought it before we were married, with money from my inheritance. You're welcome to check with a lawyer if you'd like to verify that. I stared at the folder in his hands, realizing how thoroughly he'd prepared for this conversation. While I'd been sneaking around with Milo and complaining to my friends, Henry had been consulting lawyers and gathering documentation. You can't just throw me out, I said. I'm not throwing you out, Henry replied. I'm asking you to leave voluntarily while we work through this situation. If you refuse, I'll have to explore other options. Other options? Marjorie smiled coldly. Legal options, dear. Adultery may not be a crime anymore, but it certainly affects divorce proceedings, especially when there's a child involved. The word divorce hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. This was really happening. My marriage was really ending, and I was losing everything. Henry, please, I said, my voice breaking. Can't we just talk about this? Just the two of us? We've been talking for months, Orinthia. Or rather, I've been trying to talk while you've been planning your exit strategy with another man. That's not what happened. Then explain to me what did happen. Explain why you told a room full of people that marrying me was the biggest mistake of your life. Explain why you've been meeting Milo for weeks while lying about it to me and Ava. Explain why you sent him photos and told him you were falling in love with him. I couldn't explain any of it, not in a way that would make sense or justify what I'd done. The truth was that I'd been selfish and impulsive, choosing the excitement of a fantasy over the reality of my family. Footsteps on the stairs announced Ava's return, and all three of us fell silent. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with her backpack, looking small and uncertain. I'm ready for school, she said quietly. Henry immediately shifted into father mode, his expression softening as he knelt down to Ava's level. Did you remember your permission slip for the field trip? It's in my folder, she said, but her eyes were on me. Mum, are you driving me to school today? I looked at Henry, who nodded slightly. At least he wasn't going to deny me that. Of course, sweetheart. Let's go. As we walked to my car, Ava was unusually quiet. It wasn't until we were halfway to school that she spoke. Mum, are you and Dad getting divorced? The question hit me like a truck. Why would you ask that, honey? Because Tommy's parents got divorced last year, and first they started sleeping in different rooms, and then his mum moved out, and then they had to go to court about where Tommy would live. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking too badly to drive safely. When I turned to look at Ava, her eyes were filled with tears. I don't want you and Dad to get divorced, she whispered. I want our family to stay together. Oh, baby, I said, reaching back to take her hand. Mommy and Daddy are just going through a rough patch right now. Sometimes grown-ups need time to work things out. But you'll work it out, right? You'll fix it. I wanted to promise her that everything would be okay, that our family would stay together, that this was all just a misunderstanding. But looking at her tear-stained face, I realized I couldn't make promises I might not be able to keep. "I'm going to try my best," I said finally. "I love you so much, Ava. No matter what happens between Dad and me, that will never change." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I was feeling as I realized that my choices had consequences far beyond my own happiness. After dropping Ava at school, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried. For the first time since this whole mess started, I understood what I was really losing. Not just Henry, but the life we'd built together, the home where Ava felt safe, the family traditions and inside jokes and shared history that made us more than just three people who happened to live together. I thought about Milo, about the excitement and validation he'd given me, but when I tried to imagine a future with him, all I could see was a handsome stranger who barely knew me, and certainly didn't love me the way Henry had. By the time I drove back to the house, Marjorie's car was gone, and Henry had left for work. The house felt empty and strange, like I was visiting someone else's life. On our bed, Henry's bed now, I supposed, was a thick manila envelope with my name on it. Inside were legal documents, separation papers, custody arrangements, and a list of my personal belongings that I was welcome to take. At the bottom of the pile was a handwritten note in Henry's careful script. "Orinthia, I loved you for 10 years. I would have loved you for 50 more. But I can't love someone who doesn't respect me, and I won't let Ava grow up thinking this is what marriage looks like. You can reach me through my lawyer if you need anything. Henry." I sank onto the bed, clutching the note and finally understanding the full scope of what I'd destroyed. This wasn't just about Milo or the messages, or even the humiliation at the dinner party. This was about years of taking Henry for granted, of choosing my own desires over our family's well-being, of slowly eroding the love and respect that had once held us together. And now it was